Welcome everyone. My name is Máté Barabás. I'm a technical program manager at Microsoft, and today I have Bilal Amjad here with me. He's a cloud solution architect. We are both part of the Azure Verified Modules V team. I'm one of the PMs, and he's one of our lead SMEs. Today, we're going to tell you about how you can accelerate your Azure platform journey with Azure Verified Modules, Azure Landing Zones, and subscription vending. So let's first talk about Azure Verified Modules, which is the official Microsoft strategy, infra as code strategy for Bicep and Terraform. Maybe before we go into the details, it's important to quickly take a glance at why AVM came to be. So this diagram here explains the typical customer journey when a customer starts adopting the cloud. They normally start with what we jokingly call ClickOps, which basically is just a funny way of saying using the UI on the portal. Of course, there is nothing wrong with it, but there are more efficient ways of building in the cloud. So over time, pretty much every customer realizes that they need to start using infrastructure as code and adopt some DevOps practices. What then happens is that they start building code on their own, and very quickly they realize that they have probably like 5 different standards for the exact same thing. So they need to rationalize and decouple the existing code base so that it can actually be useful. At that point, they typically look around on the internet and they realize that there are some open source solutions that they can either draw from or fully adopt. And they try to make an educated decision on which one to choose. And since it's Azure, they kind of like to look into what's in the Azure or Microsoft namespaces of GitHub. They pick something, they start adopting it just to later realize that that repository was just, I mean, some of these are of course very professional ones, but they are just like a side project of some Microsoft employees. They are not fully officially supported or not maintained over a long period of time. So at that point, the realization came to be that we need to build something that we actually support as Microsoft. That is the single solution for infra as code that everybody can pull from, build up on, and leverage for their cloud adoption journey. Couple of key characteristics about Azure Verified Modules. I did mention that currently we are focused on the Bicep and the Terraform languages, but there's nothing in the framework that would prevent us from later adding additional languages. We do follow the well-architected framework of Microsoft. Very specifically, we focus on the security and reliability pillars of the framework when we build these modules. The goal here is to standardize and accelerate the cloud adoption journey of both boarding cloud or cloud-native applications, as well as migrated applications that you redeploy in the cloud. The solution is publicly available, it's open source, and it's absolutely free. And it's not only for end customers, but also for our partners and Microsoft as well. In fact, there are already product teams at Microsoft who are building AVM into their product. One example I can mention is the AZD CLI, the Azure Developer CLI, that already relies on Azure Verified Modules, but also Microsoft IT internally deploys virtual infrastructure using these modules. So let's take a look at what exactly Azure Verified Modules are, technically speaking. So this one here is a stack diagram, so let's read it from the bottom up. At the bottom, you can see Azure Resource Manager, which is, of course, the API layer of the cloud of Azure. And on top of that layer, you have certain domain-specific languages sitting, such as Bicep or Terraform. Naturally, you can write templates that can interact with the API layer in those languages. And what AVM is, really, it's logically sitting on top, meaning it's not like a new language, but it's rather a library of templates that are written in these languages. And these templates are then published in the related registries. What's a registry? A registry is a version artifact store. So Bicep has its own, Microsoft has its own, which is called the Bicep Public Registry. And HashiCorp, the company who owns Terraform, they also have their own registry. And basically, these assets are published there. So when we zoom into that big green box there, you will see that we have 3 different types of modules. Let me start with the resource module category. So those are the low-level atomic building blocks. You can think of those as the storage accounts of the world, or the key vaults, or the virtual machines. So anything really that is represented in Azure as a resource has a corresponding resource module more or less available in Azure Verified Modules. Parent modules, on the other hand, are like a higher level, more complex constructs sitting one layer above. Those are like the really complex application accelerators or landing zone accelerators or complex workloads or architectural patterns of the world. Here we mentioned a couple of examples. There is one for Azure Kubernetes Services as a landing zone accelerator. There is another one for Azure Virtual Desktop, but you could think of any other, like even third-party technologies here as well. And then last but not least, we have a third category called utility modules. Those are like small sidecar features, basically functions that otherwise we would have had to re-implement from module to module. And instead, we have them carved out to a dedicated utility module and just reference them in these resource and pattern modules. Now, you might wonder if you have ever used any publicly available module library. How is this different? For example, one question that we commonly get is like, how does it compare with the GitHub quick start templates or Azure quick start templates that are available on GitHub? There are a couple of key differences. One is that we have a lot of standards, we call them specifications, that are actually built into these modules, so they all look and feel the same. The other thing is that when you consider this categorization, that's not really a thing on the GitHub quick start template library. And then last but not least, when you, for example, look for a virtual machine module on this quick start template library, you will find an instance that is, let's say, a Windows VM. Then you will find another instance, another template that is a Windows VM with 2 data disks. Then you will find another one, which is a Windows VM with a domain join feature. But if you need a Windows VM with 2 data disks and the domain join feature, you won't be lucky. So you will have to basically build those Lego blocks together on your own. And in contrast with that, in Azure Verified Modules, what these resource modules are, they have high level of complexity inside. They have a lot of dynamic expressions, functions, etc. inside. So the sheer idea is that all the features what a given resource can provide are basically included in a single module, and you can just interact with that module by using the parameters. So there is complexity inside, and we are basically trading that complexity that's inside, and there is simplicity outside, because you can just use parameters. All right, let's move on to the demo. My demo will have 2 parts. First, I'm going to show you the AVM website and roughly what you can find on it. And then second, I'm going to show you what the Bicep solution development experience looks like in VS Code. So let me see if I can get out of here. Awesome. New features, even better. Okay, so here's my browser. And the AVM website is available using the following short link, aka.ms/AVM. So right here, you are welcomed with a short video, which is more or less the same pitch that I'm giving you right now. So in case you want to show AVM to your colleagues, that's probably a good place to start. And then on the left-hand side, you see the menu. We, of course, have a brief introduction here. We have module indexes. I'm going to talk about those in a moment. And then down here, we have a usage guide. For now, we only have a quick start guide. We are adding new content here as we speak, so expect more to show up very soon. Then I mentioned that we have very strict specifications and definitions that every single module follows. Those are summarized here. Then, to give you an expectation what type of support there is behind Azure Verified Modules, like how can you open issues, request new features, etc. All of that is described there. If you want to contribute, because it's open source, again, publicly available, you definitely can, and all the related documentation is available down there. And then last but not least, we have a resources section here. I do want to mention that we have quarterly community calls. The last one took place, I think, like 5-6 weeks ago, so the next one is due sometime in May. We always announce those here on the website, and we also record them and upload them to YouTube, so all the previous ones should be available, or in case you miss a next one, you will find the recording right there. And there is also an FAQ, so whenever we receive questions that we never received before, we always try to answer them there, so it's probably worth it to check them out as well. So I did say, or at least I did want to come back to module indexes. What are those? Those are the pages which show you what modules are available. So as I mentioned, we have Bicep and Terraform languages, and then we have these 3 categories, resource, pattern, and utility modules. And then you can see how many of them are available right now. So it gives you a sense of, we have roughly 200 modules for Bicep, 100 modules for Terraform. We, of course, always try to measure them. Sometimes, one of the teams are like a little bit ahead. So you can expect these to balance out over time. Let's say that I want to check out if a key vault module is available. So I'm going to go under Bicep and resource modules. And I'm just going to use Control F here and look for key vault. There is a key vault module. You can see who the owner of that module is. It's always a Microsoft full-time employee. And if I click here on the link, then it will lead me to the source code of the module, where I can see the README file, which is the documentation of this module. The README file always follows the registry structure. So here you can see what the resource types are that are included in the key vault. So of course, there is like a top-level resource, which is the key vault itself. There are children of the key vault resource, so keys, secrets, etc. But there are also tightly coupled other resources, such as resource logs, or diagnostics configuration, or role assignments, or private endpoints, just to name a few. Then there are some examples here. Typically, the first one is the simplest one. It's only a couple of lines of code. It basically holds the minimum configuration that you need to use to deploy it. And then we have example parameter files in Bicep and JSON format. Of course, if it was a Terraform module, it's in TFR format. And then we typically have, let's say, 4, 5, 6 different examples. And as you're approaching the highest number, those are typically the most complex ones. This one here, as you can see, it's way longer. It has a lot of configurations included, so it really showcases how the module can be used. And again, parameter files are also available right there. And then down here, you can see all the parameters in details. So as you can see, everything is a clickable link here. So especially if it's a complex object, you can read more about it and what all the attributes are. Okay, that concludes the first part of my demo, and let me move on to VS Code. So in here, I have like an empty file. As you can see, I just called it main.bicep. I saved it locally, and I have the Bicep extension installed on VS Code. So what I'm going to do here, let's say I'm a DevOps engineer and I was just tasked to help the team deploy a key vault in Azure that will deploy some keys or something very simple just for the sake of this demonstration. I just heard about AVM being a thing, so I want to try it out. How do I do it? So, of course, I need to know Bicep syntax. So I need to know that I need to start with the keyword of module. Then I need to give it a symbolic name. I'm going to call it my key vault. And here, even without triggering IntelliSense, just by stopping, you can see that there is an option here, which is the Bicep registry /public. That's where all the Azure verified modules are published. So it's a long list, as we saw it on the website. It's about 200 records. You can see that all of them start with the name of AVM, and there is nothing else here. No surprise, because it's Microsoft's very own Bicep public registry, and AVM is the Microsoft standard now for these modules. So basically, you can see everything that we ever published right here. So how do I find key vault? I can just type key vault, and IntelliSense will help me narrow down the list. I can hit tab, and then I can see all the available versions that it was ever published under. So I'm going to pick the latest one. And then here, I guess GitHub Copilot always wants to help me out, but I don't need it to help me out right now. So let me go back here and just re-trigger it right here. And I can add parameters, which is an object block. And I can use IntelliSense for adding any parameters that I need. So for example, I want to enable purge protection. Boom, true. Okay, fantastic. Then I want to enable soft delete as well. Excellent. Let's say now I really want to add that key that I mentioned. So keys in plural, that's an array. Let's see what properties are available. There's only one required, a name. So I'm going to call it my key. And then you can see all the available attributes. So let's say I'm going to choose whatever the maximum or the highest available key size is. And let's just say that I'm going to choose this version that is backed by a hardware security module. Okay, so let's move on. Let's say I want to grant access to my colleagues now to this key vault instance. So let's do role assignments. And that's an array because it's a plural word. And in there, once I manage to find GitHub Copilot properly, I should be able to add a principal ID. That's mandatory. So that's where I would define, who my colleagues are, what the group is for them. And then I have role definition ID or name here that I need to normally provide as a GUID. So if you ever played with Infra's code in the cloud, you know that even the most commonly used role definitions such as owner or reader or contributor, those are masked and they are shown in the documentation as a GUID. So normally this would be the point where I stop and go and check out the documentation and find out which GUID means owner, for example. Now let me show you something. So if I hover over here, this symbolic name that I typed in, there's a link which says view documentation. And if I click that, without leaving VS Code, it opens the correct page where this module is published. This just happens to be the same README file that I just showed you. And then in here, there's a parameters section. And as I'm using role assignments, I can easily navigate there and I can show you that all these keywords are now integrated into this module. So instead of looking up the GUIDs, you can just say key vault reader, key vault secret officer, etc. Okay. There is one more feature I want to show you, which is that if I hover over here and right click, I can also say go to definition. And then again, without leaving VS Code, within VS Code, this opens directly from the registry, the source code of that module that I'm editing. So I can give you an idea here real quick that even something as simple as a key vault, the amount of code that is behind this module is more than 600 lines. So you can imagine the complexity, the dynamic expressions, all the stuff that is put in there. And that's the actual extra burden that we are trying to take off your shoulders by providing you with Azure Verified modules instead of you having to write them up from scratch. All right. Going back to the presentation, there is one more slide I want to cover. So when it comes to Azure Verified modules, AVM, you don't deploy or use these modules in vacuum. You obviously always deploy and use them in the context of something else. That's something else, what we do recommend as part of the official Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, is called Azure Landing Zones. So you are supposed to have a platform landing zone, which is the core of the production-grade environment that you're supposed to have in the cloud, and then a number of application landing zones, at least one application landing zone where you will deploy your workload. And that's where AVM really shines, where you actually deploy into that application landing zone either a pattern that we provide, something that the third party provides, or something that you custom develop on your own. And I'm inviting Bilal now to tell you more about Azure Landing Zones.
So hi everyone, my name is Bilal Amjad. We obviously don't trust our laptops, so we plugged in our own for the demos. So sorry about the switch over for the laptops. Now, I think where Máté left, that's a perfect segue for me to continue to help us understand how, as yourselves at your organizations working with Azure, you can basically enable Azure as a whole. Our recommendation is to use the Azure Landing Zone in terms of setting up your platform and your application landing zone. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Just want to call out, I'm presenting here a lot of amazing work on behalf of my team and org. So Jack, Matt, Paul, and Gerard, who are basically the brains behind what we're going to be seeing today. So just a shout out to them. And you've got these are all GitHub handles, so you can follow them in case you need to stay updated. Now, let's talk about platform landing zones and application landing zones. Azure Landing Zones is broken up into two parts, platform landing zones and application landing zones. Platform landing zones are basically focused on getting your overall Azure environment enabled as a platform for workloads and applications to come in. So if you've got, let's say, 10 workloads or 100 workloads or n number of workloads or application, how do the central services that those workloads or application depend on get enabled? So that includes networking, that includes identity, that includes monitoring. So any and all infra services which are central to a number of workloads, that all falls into platform. On the application side, that's where your applications come in. So a team comes up to you and say, hey, I want to deploy CRM into Azure. I want to deploy an ERP into Azure. So that's where your application landing zones come in. Now, what we've done so imagining that Azure Landing Zones and setting up platform landing zones and application landing zones is a critical piece of enablement in Azure. that critical piece of enablement is now basically backed with Azure verified modules. So if you are looking to set up Azure Landing Zones, whether platform or application, you can do that with basically Azure verified modules. We have that available as of this January. The team basically announced the ability to do that in Terraform. Bicep is following suit, and you should be able to see that also available very soon. Now, platform landing zone wise, there are four key things or three key things that I'd like to share with you. When you're setting up platform landing zones, one of the first things that you will do is that you'll basically create your management groups and your policy enablement. So that's the first part. So you can see there's a particular AVM platform, AVM pattern module referenced over there. Once you've done that, the next step you do is that you set up your management resources. So those management resources are like your central log analytics workspace, which basically does the, where you have all your monitoring logs go in, your data collection rules and your managed identities. Then probably the most key aspect is networking, whether you want to do it in terms of hub and spoke or in terms of virtual WAN. And you can see which pattern modules from AVM we leverage for that and what resources get deployed using those pattern modules. So going back to what Máté was showing in the AVM website, these pattern modules that you see here, you'll find them in the AVM website, and then you can basically get to the GitHub repo of that module. Now, for those of you who might have worked on our previous landing zone module, it used to be called CAF, Enterprise Scale Landing Zone module for Terraform. It used to be a big monolithic module. And one of the feedback that we used to get from our customers was that this module is too big and we need it to be more modular and composable. And that's where the shift from that particular module has happened over to a set of AVM modules now. We were also reaching certain limits related to management groups and policies. So decomposing that big module into these AVM modules has helped us better manage. And then last but not the least, these modules are also now being leveraged by our ISC Accelerator, which I'll basically demo to you in a bit and also help you understand that, okay, Microsoft, you've given us code, that's really good, but you need to help me understand how I take that code and operationalize an Azure environment end to end, not just the code. So the Accelerator is primarily specifically for that purpose. So coming over to the Accelerator, let's put some spotlight on the Accelerator. What does the Accelerator do for you? So first and foremost, it supports Bicep and Terraform. It bootstraps a CI/CD environment for you. So again, you've got the code, but how do I use that code to now bootstrap a CI/CD environment based on a repo, which is sitting in some version control system, which I prefer, whether that's Azure DevOps or GitHub, or maybe it could be something else like GitLab or Bitbucket. And then basically give you a composable, configurable platform landing zone setup. We recommend this for most users as your starting point. It aims to cover 80% of the scenarios that we've seen. There is functionality within it for you to customize. So if you would like to customize it to your needs, and we'll talk about that a bit in the demo, you can also do that. And then there's a easy to follow process, which I'll share in the demo when we get to that point. This particular slides and the slides coming up next, I'll just like you to take some mental snapshot of these slides, because I'm going to connect the concepts that you see here into the demo. On the left-hand side, what are the main components of this accelerator? So first and foremost, our documentation, which we'll go through in terms of the user guide and the platform landing zones. Second, 2 key configuration files, and we'll look at those 2 key configuration files. One is focused on the bootstrap. So the bootstrap, the configurations for setting up the CI/CD environment, that file is for this file takes care of that configuration. The second configuration file is platform landing zones. So what you're going to deploy in Azure as your platform, like which single region, multi-region, hub and spoke topology, a virtual WAN, firewall, third-party firewall. So all of those details kind of go into this. And then those files are then consumed by an Azure Landing Zone PowerShell module. So those were the main components. Now the main phases, which we'll talk about, are first you're going to do your planning. So planning is basically you figuring out how I'm going to bootstrap. Am I using Azure DevOps, GitHub, or something else? And then you also figuring out on the platform side, what am I going to deploy, single region, multi-region, which topology, and so on. Once you've done your planning, you go into prerequisites. That's where you prepare the prerequisites that are needed on bootstrapping your CI/CD environment and your platform side in terms of subscriptions. Then you go to phase 2, where you run the bootstrap and it configures a template, prepares the Terraform code, puts it in the repo, sets up the CI/CD pipelines, sets up your runners, sets up your identities, and then on the Azure side. And then last but not the least, once you have all of that hooked up, then you run your pipeline, and that does your deployment of Azure Landing Zones in your Azure environment. One other thing that I'd like to share before we go into the demo is that if you're wondering in terms of bootstrapping the CI/CD environment, what does this look like? So it looks it would be configured based on what you're seeing on this diagram over here. So on the Azure side, you'll get a couple of identities. These managed identities using federated credentials will be used for plan and apply. You'll get a storage account with the container for hosting your state file, because you want to make sure your state file is secure, and that will be set up with private networking. If you want to configure your agents and runners, you'll have the ability to do that also. So your agents and runners would be configured also. On the version control system side, whether that's Azure DevOps or GitHub, a repository will be set up for you. The environment will be set up. Groups and teams will be set up for you. Your pipelines and actions will be there for your CI/CD. And then variable sets or repository variables, depending upon whether you're using GitHub or Azure DevOps. Alongside that, whether your agent setup, so if you can basically have an agent pool or runner group, again, based on your version control system. Specific to Azure DevOps are your service connections. So that's like a high-level overview of how this would get set up once you run it. There are a few scenarios which we've seen come across from our customers. They are listed here. Let me break them down into even more simply for you. The first thing you're going to choose is, am I doing a multi-region deployment or a single region deployment? That's the first thing you'll do. The second thing you'll do is, am I deploying hub and spoke or virtual WAN? And then the third thing you'll choose is, am I deploying Azure firewall or a third-party firewall? So those are the three things that you'll basically figure out. And then you can, if you're not looking to go with the full-blown deployment, you can also just deploy the management group hierarchy, the policies, and the management resources only. And then within a scenario, once you've selected a scenario, you've got some options. So these options are based on, again, customer feedback. So for example, one of the most popular ones being, hey, Microsoft, no offense, we like your naming convention, but we like ours better. So we want to use that. So we've given that option for you to customize your naming conventions. Customers want to turn off the DDoS plan, maybe bring in their own existing DDoS plan. They want to add additional regions. Another popular one is IP address ranges. You want to basically use your own IP address ranges. So those are some of the options that you can choose from when you're basically deploying this. So once you've got your platform all up and running, so that was all the platform side. Now let's shift over to the application side. So you've got your platform set up, but a platform without any applications running on it or any workloads running on it is probably no good for any organization or any business. The real value comes out from it when applications and workloads start coming onto it. That's where you need to then automate the next mile of this journey, which is your application landing zone setup. So if an application, let's say an application team comes up to you and says, hey, we want to deploy an ERP into Azure. For them to be able to do that, you need to prepare a landing zone for them in Azure where they can basically do that deployment. That starts with, let's say, your subscriptions. You're going to automate your subscription creation. Once you've done your subscriptions, then you're going to set up connectivity for them. You're going to see how their code repository gets connected to this application landing zone, set up security, observability, and management for them, set up the CI/CD for them, see how access would be granted to this landing zone, what developer coding environment would be used, whether that's in terms of dev, test, prod, or whether that's in terms of like giving them dev boxes. And then last but not the least, basically deploying the application infrastructure into that landing zone. So if all of this is happening manually, you could imagine that's going to take a lot of time. If all of this is happening through automation in a standardized process that whenever an application comes along to you, you're able to follow an application landing zone process which deploys, kind of like vends, we call it subscription vending, vends out that subscription, then that's the process probably that we want to get to, so that all that manual step is taken out and it's all automated end to end. What does this look from an end-to-end picture? So what you see here on your screen, on the screen right now is we start with creating the platform subscriptions, and then you create the platform which we talked about. From platform, your next journey is the landing zone vending, the application landing zone vending. Whether you're using Terraform or Bicep, we've got modules for both of them so that you can basically vend out your landing zone for an application. And then once you've done that, the last mile of this is deploying the workload. So if the application team have got a specific thing that they're looking to deploy in Azure, so let's take example SAP. So they're looking to deploy SAP. So we've got automation that's the last mile of automation that we've got to you in terms of, we call it accelerators. So I think I've done quite a bit of a talking now. I need to show you what I've just described to you here, so that once you go from here or if you're looking at the recording of this session, you're able to basically realize what we've discussed here today. So let me head into get out from presentation mode here, and I will take us into a browser. Let's start there. And I'll basically, I'll try to assume as if I'm the audience here, and if I'm looking at this session, what's my starting point? So if I do this as Microsoft, I'm probably going to miss some steps here. So if I'm at an organization and I'm looking at this session and I'm looking to see how am I going to do all of this that we've just shared with you, my first step is to go to aka.ms/ALZ, which is basically our documentation on Azure Landing Zones. Once you get here, you will see pretty much the same concepts which we discussed. So you see the platform landing zone and application landing zone concepts that we just discussed over here. Then the next thing that you'll see is you'll see the Azure verified modules for a platform landing zone deployment. And then from there, you can basically go into seeing, okay, I'm going to do this ISE, I'm not doing Portal. And in ISE, I'm interested in Bicep or Terraform. So if you click this link should basically take you to this link over here, which gives you the details on deploying Azure Landing Zones. So once you get here, you will be able to see the deployment options. So there's Portal, there's Terraform, there's Bicep. For this demo, we're going to focus on Terraform. So if I click the Terraform deployment option, that will take me to this website, which you see here. This is our technical documentation of our accelerator and our landing zones. And this website, you will see you'll see some of the concepts in the slides, which we saw. You'll see them getting connected over here. So let's start with, first and foremost, let's start with the accelerator itself, the user guide. So the user guide is broken up into phases, 4 phases. Phase 0 is basically for planning. So in planning, you'll basically download a checklist. It's a good old-fashioned design exercise. You'll download an Excel checklist, and that Excel checklist will help you make two decisions primarily: bootstrap decisions and platform decisions. From bootstrap point of view, you're going to decide which ISC am I doing, Bicep or Terraform, which version control system I'm doing, GitHub or DevOps or something else. Which module am I going to use? The one that I'm going to be showing here today is basically the platform landing zone module. Which regions am I going to deploy in? The bootstrap resources, the regions for platform resources, the parent management group from where that deployment will start, the subscriptions that you will provide in which that deployment will happen, the subscription for bootstrap resources that will get deployed, the naming of those bootstrap resources, and then networking. Networking if you're basically using private networking with self-hosted agents and runners, or you're using public networking, or you're using basically public networking with Microsoft hosted agents and runners. So you'll provide all of this configuration, and last but not the least, your version control specific settings also. So that takes care of your bootstrap configuration. The second configurations that you will do is on your platform now. What's going to deploy as part of your platform in Azure. So two key decisions that you'll make. So going back to the scenarios we discussed, the scenarios, you'll have to pick a scenario. Which scenario am I deploying? Multi-region, single region, Azure hub and spoke topology, or virtual WAN, Azure firewall, or third-party firewall. So based on that, you'll pick a scenario. You can choose any one of these scenarios. Once you've picked up that scenario, the second thing that you'll do is you'll choose your options. Within options, you can say, okay, I picked my scenario. I want to make some configurations. Like, for example, I want to change the resource naming conventions. So this is where this guidance and options comes into play to help you do that. So once you basically have done that, then you get into prerequisites related to PowerShell and Azure CLI. You prepare your Azure subscriptions and your permissions. You prepare your version control systems for that. Once you've taken care of your prerequisites, then you're ready to hit the road. So this is where you start your bootstrap. So you basically start with installing the Azure Landing Zone PowerShell module. Once you've installed that, you then choose, okay, am I going to deploy with Terraform, GitHub, and I'm going to assume I'm deploying in GitHub, and I'm using Terraform as my ISC. So for me to be able to do that, I'm going to basically go into this place where I will, just a minute, sorry. So I'm going to go into GitHub with Terraform and basically run a few commands, creating a directory first with the two configuration files that we talked about, one for Bootstrap, one for Landing Zone. And then once I've created those files, put all my configurations in that I did in phase 0. Then from there, I'm going to simply run deploy Accelerator. So how does this look like? Let's head over into Visual Studio Code. I've got my folder created. I've got my config files created. This is the Bootstrap configuration, which you see here. The YAML file, the tf-vars file is basically your platform configuration. So the tf-vars file for your platform configuration, the YAML file for your Bootstrap configuration. Once you basically fill these two files out, you basically run the deploy accelerator command as you see here. I've run that already. You run that, that's basically a Terraform plan and apply. And the end result of it will be that you'll basically get to a point where it has successfully bootstrapped your environment, your Azure environment, with a CI/CD environment. What does that mean basically? So if we head back into browser, I will be able to show you this. You will see that a repo has been created here. This repo is basically based on all the configurations that were provided in the Bootstrap configuration and the platform configuration. So what it's basically done here is that you'll find the Terraform code in this repo is basically will deploy your platform landing zone. So let's say you said, I'm going to deploy in a single region hub and spoke topology. That code is basically sitting in this repo. It hasn't run yet, but it's sitting and it's ready for you to run a pipeline so that you can do the deployment. So all of that has been configured and done for you. You haven't had to do anything manually here. So how would you do that basically? If you go into actions, you will see two actions, one for continuous integration, one for continuous deployment. You'll see that I've already run the action where it has run the deployment for me already. And that deployment has then, basically if I go back into Azure, the deployment has then for me created a few things. Azure Landing Zones architecturally starts at management groups. So you will see that it's created those management groups. On these management groups, it's deployed the policies. It's brought in the subscriptions underneath the right management groups that they need to go to. And then within them, it's further then deployed the resources that I told it to deploy within those subscriptions. So you can see that all of that is deployed here. There were Bootstrap resources that were also deployed. So if I go to the subscription that I gave it for Bootstrap resources, those resources basically sit here, and it created basically 4 groups. So you might be wondering, where am I going to host my Terraform state file? That basically goes into this group that you see here, this resource group. It hosts a storage account with private networking. And there are other resources that have been created here that all are basically enabling your resources. So if I go one step back, you'll be able to see all the resources that it has created here. So these are all the resources that the bootstrapping part has basically done. The container instances, container registry, the management identities, and the private networking, all of that is basically the bootstrap part. So that was phase 3, which I just walked you through. You basically then, once you've done it, you basically run the action to do the deployment, and then that's the output that you get in Azure. So that takes care of your platform part. You step 1, Bootstrap. Step 2, platform. Step 3, application landing zones. How does that happen now? So for that, going back to Azure Landing Zones, within Azure Landing Zones, again, just repeating the short URL, aka.ms/ALZ, you'll find a design area called Platform Automation and DevOps. In this area, you will find how we talk about subscription vending, how you can vend out a landing zone to an application that wants to go live, that wants to deploy in Azure, and how you can basically do that through automation, whether Terraform or Bicep. So there are, you will find on this documentation, you will find links to these 2 repos, landing zone vending with Terraform and landing zone vending with Bicep. You can leverage these to basically deploy this landing zone vending concept that basically gives you the application landing zone that you will give to your application teams. The last part, if you might remember that slide that I was just sharing at the start, which was around the deployment of the workload. Your application team says, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to deploy an AKS-based application. Is there automation for that also? So that's the last mile, right? So you can basically go here on this particular page that I'm showing here, and you will find that you can get different landing zone accelerators, which you can take and then deploy them through automation, Terraform and Bicep. So let's take an example here. Let's take this particular example here for Azure OpenAI chat baseline architecture. If your application team is saying, hey, we're going to deploy a generative AI application, and we need something that gives us how that application looks like in terms of a reference architecture, and in terms of reference implementation, then the accelerator that you see here helps you do that last mile of deployment. And I think that pretty much covers the demo that I wanted to share with you. I will ask Máté to just come back and help us close out the session. So Máté, over to you.
All right, thank you, Bilal. So we really hope you liked learning about Azure Verified Modules and Azure Landing Zones. Here we gathered the most important links for you, so we recommend taking a photo of this one. The QR code right there leads you to ak.ms/avm, and then you can see the short links here for Azure Landing Zones as well. So ak.ms/alz, and then alz/tech-docs for the second portal that Bilal showed you. And we kindly want to ask you to also provide your feedback about our session by filling out the official survey. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.